Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar on mindfulness trends in the workplace. My name is Molly Buss, and I'm the Community Relations Manager at the Earl E. Bakken Center for Spirituality and Healing. And my role for today's webinar is to facilitate the chat and also moderate the Q&A. While we get settled, please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, perhaps sharing what organization you're joining us from or what you're hoping to learn about today. I also want to give a quick introduction of the Bakken Center for those who may not be familiar with our work. It is our vision to advance the health and well-being of individuals, organizations, and communities through integrative health and healing. And during the COVID-19 pandemic, we have strived to provide free resources and webinars to help you navigate these challenging times. We need your help to continue to do this work. So if you're able to, please consider making a donation of any amount. And more information about how to do that will be provided in the post-webinar email. Today, I'm delighted to introduce Marianne Johnson, Mindfulness and Wellbeing Instructor at the Bakken Center, and Alex Haley, Assistant Professor and Integrative Health and Wellbeing Research Team Member, also at the Bakken Center. Before I turn things over to Marianne and Alex, just a couple of logistical items to note to help you navigate the webinar functions. You're welcome to share your thoughts and comments via the chat box. And if you would like to share your responses with all attendees, please make sure to update the to field to all panelists and attendees. Otherwise, it will just go to us panelists. And then just note that you have the opportunity to minimize the chat box during the presentation, and we invite for you to do that during the components that aren't interactive to help you remain present. There's also a Q&A icon where you can submit any questions you may have for our presenters, and we'll do our best to answer as many of those as we have time for at the end of this session. If you can't find those icons, try hovering your mouse over the bottom of the webinar screen and they should pop up for you. I also want to note we're sending out an email afterwards with a recording of the webinar and other resources, so watch for that later this afternoon. Without further ado, I'll now turn things over to Marianne and Alex.
Thanks for that introduction, Molly, and welcome everyone. We're really happy to be here, and I'm delighted to be doing this with Alex today. We thought we'd give just a brief introduction of ourselves and then get going. I think Molly told you what it is that we do at the center, and I am fortunate enough to say that I've been at the center just almost exactly a year and a half today. And I'm delighted to be here as one of the mindfulness instructors and a well-being instructor as well. I come here after many years of serving as an organization development consultant and a mediator working primarily in public health, or not public health, excuse me, public policy, but I did do some work in public health as well. And about 10 years ago, I went through a period of taking a look at what I wanted the big last chunk of my life work to be about. And when I realized that mindfulness has been such an important part of my personal practice for many years, about 10 years ago, I decided to get training and went and studied at University of Massachusetts with John Kabat-Zinn and eventually became a certified mindfulness-based stress reduction instructor. I've worked in mindful leadership with the Institute of Mindful Leadership, started here in Minnesota at General Mills, and then more recently, prior to coming and working at the center here at the University of Minnesota, I worked at United Health Group and helped them create a mindfulness program and program for employees as well. So I think that's enough about me other than to say that I feel really passionate about the practice of mindfulness, and I've had a personal practice for, dare I say, over probably 25 years. So I'll leave it at that. And Alex, maybe a brief introduction by you as well before we go over what we're going to do today.
Sure. Delighted to be here with you all. Thank you all for taking the time out of your day. Hopefully you'll find something useful in today's webinar. A little bit about my background. So at the center, I primarily teach academic classes, both graduate and undergraduate courses. And then I'm also part of our Integrative Health and Wellbeing Research Program. And we have a number of active randomized clinical trials in the area of mindfulness. So we have a study with the VA. We have another study with the YMCA. And, you know, I'm really passionate about this topic. It's something that I care about, and also looking at some of the evolution that's happening right now in the field, I think is really important. My personal background, I was introduced to these practices when I was in high school. I had a high school math teacher, changed the course of my life. And I still, you know, practice, study, and use this on a daily basis. And I think given um, just what's happening right now in the world with, you know, we have the economic distress, we have all of the issues that are front and center around systemic racism. We have all of the issues just related to the health and health disparities associated with COVID. I mean, this is, you know, this is quite a challenging time. And so just to name some of that, and also to, you know, hopefully share some useful information. So I'm delighted that we're here with you today. So thank you again for taking the time.
Thanks, Alex. So here's what we'll do today. We're assuming that some of you may be relatively new to mindfulness. So we're going to start out describing what mindfulness is and isn't a little bit about its background. We'll also do a short practice in mindfulness meditation. And then we're going to dive into the recent interest and research in mindfulness, and we'll dig into some trends as well. And then we really want to provide an opportunity at the close of this. There's a lot of wisdom, our guess is, in those of you participating today, and we'd like to hear from you. So we're going to carve out some time at the end to take some of your comments and questions as well, so that we can learn and grow together as a community. So since this is a mindfulness presentation, we thought it'd be really nice just to take a moment or two to arrive. Many of us are going from Zoom meeting to Zoom meeting, or taking care of kids studying at home, right? While you're also holding down a job, or just the multifaceted aspects of our lives right now. So let's take a moment together to just arrive here and now. Maybe taking a couple of deeper, fuller in-breaths and out-breaths. And just feeling your feet on the floor, the body being held and supported by the chair you're sitting in right now. Right here, right now. Thank you again for being here and transitioning with us. That was helpful to me too. I don't know about you, Alex, but all right. So because we're curious about your interests, we thought we'd take just a moment and start with a poll. So just 4 questions to ask you. And if you're like me, you're going to want to check all of them. But maybe for the purposes of today, if you could put the most important one for you, that would be really helpful.
We'll just give people a moment here. I see some responses coming in.
Great. We've also given you an opportunity to respond in chat if it doesn't fit, right? There's another reason. Let us know.
I'll give people just a couple more seconds here to get their responses in. Great, and it looks like most of you have shared what your responses are, so I will share those results here. So it looks like the majority were at 53%. The reason they are here today are they want to learn new resources and tools for helping others mitigate stress and enhance well-being at work. The second one was personally curious about mindfulness and meditation, and then at 36%, and then the final one at 12% was experience in actively participating or leading mindfulness at work programming, and they want an update. And you must have covered everyone's responses, Miriam, because there was actually 0% at the other.
All right. Well, maybe we'll learn a little bit more about some of you too as we get towards the end with our question and comment period. But thank you for that. So that's terrific. You know, your interest in wanting to learn new tools to help mitigate stress in the workplace with others that you work for. Hopefully, we'll be able to share some of those with you, and you'll be able to include others as we journey here together today. So let's start out with mindfulness. Mindfulness, many of you know, is a practice that's at least 2,000 years old, comes to us from Eastern traditions, including Buddhism. And the mindfulness that we teach here now at the University of Minnesota is a secular approach. However, I always like to say that if you look at most of the world's religions, you will find some similarities, some contemplative practices very similar to mindfulness. So this is nothing new, it's very ancient. And what many have done, including John Kabat-Zinn and Diana Winston at the University of California in Los Angeles at the Mindfulness Awareness Research Center there, have taken the core of these practices and made them broadly available to many people with this secular approach. And we teach that here at the University of Minnesota and conduct our research in that fashion as well. So we describe mindfulness as awareness of one's present moment experience. That sounds pretty simple, right? Aren't we always kind of in our present moment? Well, if we stop and really pause for a moment and consider that, many of us, most of the time, probably over 50% of the time, some of the research tells us our minds are wandering, and they're generally wandering to one of two places. We're either pre-living, leaning into our future, something that hasn't even happened with anticipatory thoughts, or we're reliving a past that's long gone. And rumination obviously can result from that. Now, there's nothing wrong with planning or learning from the past, but for most of us, being all hands on deck and present is something that adds a sense of well-being in our lives and lets us be more accessible to those we care about, and as well as enhancing our own well-being. And then there are these attitudes that we cultivate with this practice of mindfulness that we like to point out: a sense of openness, of curiosity, kindness. Some would say that some of these qualities are naturally enhanced and evolved as we practice more and more. And then this non-judgmental attitude is an aspect of mindfulness that John Kabat-Zinn, who founded mindfulness-based stress reduction, likes to mention with some frequency. And when we take a look at some of the work that's been done recently by neuroscientists, they'll tell us that the brain has a negativity bias. In other words, it's constantly scanning the environment for what might be missing or not working. And of course, you wouldn't be listening today, and Alex and I wouldn't be participating if our ancestors hadn't been hardwired that way. You know, to the fight and flee comes from that. But we're capable of so much more as well. So one of the things we like to do is that openness, that sense of cultivating an attitude of curiosity. Mindfulness might serve as an antidote, if you will, to that negativity bias. So that's enough said about that, other than to say that I think mindfulness is a tool that we use to help us move out of our autopilot tendencies, that reactivity that we tend to have, so that we can respond more intentionally throughout our lives. And here's a process model for mindfulness that I like to show whenever we talk about mindfulness, because I have to say, when I started practicing years ago, I thought I could never meditate. I just had way too racy of a mind, way too much thinking, and didn't think meditation was for me. And I hear that now from many, many students. And mindfulness is not about eliminating our thoughts or blissing out. It's something that, for me, is far more powerful than that, and also empowering, if you will. So generally, we start with an object, like following breath. Many of you may be familiar with that. And then our attention will wander. Our minds like to wander. They think. That's what they do. So we're not trying to fix the fact that our minds wander. What we're doing instead is training our minds. Not unlike we want to get stronger physically, we go work out at the gym. With mindfulness, we're training our minds to be with what is, more attentive, and also to focus our attention and our awareness with kindness. So we notice when our attention has wandered, we wake up to that, and rather than judging it harshly, we bring with some kindness our attention back to our focal point, in this case, for example, the breath, and we begin again fresh and new. Every breath, a new opportunity to begin fresh and new. So when we describe meditation, I like to say that just to get rid of that misnomer there, that meditation is about not thinking, getting rid of our thoughts, or blissing out as well. And here's another aspect of meditation and of mindfulness in particular that we like to share, and that is that it's other-oriented. It's not just about enhancing our own well-being, but it also involves social and environmental awareness. Because personally, I found this for myself, and I'm assuming many of you as well. When we practice mindfulness over time, we're often able to see and respond to others with greater sensitivity, understanding, and I might say compassion and empathy too. And when you look at the world around us right now, the difficulty that many of us are facing, the divisiveness of our politics, that can be a really valuable skill, I think, for all of us. So we thought we'd do just a brief mindfulness meditation here as a sample, just as a way to ground us. And for those of you who may be new to mindfulness meditation, Alex, did you want to do this meditation?
Sure, I'd be happy to.
Great.
So for this meditation, just a couple of things. One of the trends in mindfulness and in mindfulness teaching definitely is taking trauma-sensitive approaches. So just naming that explicitly, because what it means, if I boil it down, is that you get choice. You get to decide if you want to try this with us or not. And for every body and every mind, it's going to be slightly different. So you can decide, if you feel more comfortable having your eyes open or having your eyes closed. It's really up to you. And also remembering that even in this brief practice that I'll do, if at any time you feel like thoughts, emotions, sensations feel like too much, then you stop. And you can actually take your attention out into the environment, wherever you happen to be joining us from, and really just noticing the physicality of the environment, feeling your own body. So just want to, again, highlight that at the beginning, because it's really important to remember that what I'm offering is an invitation. It's not a command. It's not an instruction. It's really just an invitation. And so if you'd like to join, please feel free, and remember that you have choice. So with that, I'll just offer a very simple grounding practice. And I do this a lot throughout my working day. I can do it usually within a minute or less. I'll have us take a few more minutes just now so you get a flavor of the practice. So the first piece is to just arrive. So Marianne mentioned this before, but just again, having that awareness of where you are in time and space. Right? You are in some physical space right in this moment. So just noticing that. And noticing that it's right now. So it's not, we're not in the past, or we're not leading into the future. We're just tuning into it's this moment right now. And then allowing yourself to really tune into the fullness of the felt sense of your body in this moment. And if that feels like too much, then you can just be aware of ambient sounds in the room, or just a subtle sense of your own breath. But deciding for yourself, just either the full body felt sense, sounds in the room, or just your own breathing. And just let your mind rest with that experience for just a few moments. And remember that we're not getting anywhere, we're not doing anything, and thoughts are not a problem, feelings are not a problem. All of it can be here, all of it's included, it's all welcome. But we're just allowing ourselves to settle back with this home base of the body, home base of hearing, or just the home base of the breath itself. So just taking a couple more moments. And if you would please, I'd like you to just check in for a moment with your felt sense experience, your embodied experience, and just notice if there's a subtle sense of hovering. And what I mean by this is that I often feel this throughout my day, like there's so much energy, so many thoughts in my mind, or just a lot of anticipating. I can feel kind of like I'm hovering. It's almost like if you were to look at me, I was just a little bit up in my seat or my chair, and just invite yourself to really ground down. So letting your body really settle into the chair, or if you're standing, let your feet really settle down into the ground. So whatever posture you're in, just letting the fullness of your body settle down towards the ground. And you may feel a subtle sense of just kind of like a resting quality, or it's a kind of a release. Feels like, oh, I'm not efforting as much, or I'm not anticipating as much. And whatever is there, maybe there's no change, and just being okay with that. And then just allowing yourself to take a slightly fuller in breath and out breath. So, particularly because we're on a Zoom call, our breathing tends to get more shallow. So, seeing if you can just soften the abdomen and allow yourself to have a full in breath all the way down, that diaphragmatic breathing, feeling the movement of the abdomen, feeling the expansion of the chest, even the air coming into the nostrils. And a similar long, full exhale. And then finally, just taking a moment to notice, how's your mind right now? What's your mind like, even after this brief practice? How's your mood? How are you feeling? And how's your body? What's your body telling you? And then you can let this really brief practice go. And if your eyes were closed, just opening your eyes and orienting again to the space that you're in. If your eyes were open, just taking a moment to maybe glance around the room. So again, I took a longer time period, but I can do this in about a minute or less throughout the workday. So the emphasis is arriving. I'll just kind of recap: arriving, picking some kind of home base, whether it's the body, hearing, or the breath, really allowing the body to settle, to ground, and then really inviting in a kind of a full breath, but it's not like we're changing the breath, we're just allowing the breath to be full. And that simple process, you can do countless times throughout a day. And I find it particularly helpful on Zoom calls because there's something about a kind of like up and out that I experience through Zoom. So the antidote to that is a kind of down and in.
Thank you, Alex. That was so lovely. I think we could, if we could take just a couple of your comments, if you'd like, maybe just in chat right now, what you noticed in that meditation, maybe just a word or a phrase, if you'd like. certainly not a requirement, but just a comment or two, and Molly can share with us, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, so we're getting some responses. Calm, relaxation, peace, grounding, feeling more relaxed. So those are some of the common themes.
Thank you. So again, that was just a couple of minutes there that we took. And when we talk about that empowering aspect of being able to enhance our well-being through this practice, I think it can be a powerful experience. Now, some of you may not have experienced those qualities as well. You may have really noticed the racy mind or aches in the body or something else as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, because what mindfulness does is actually increase our sense of awareness of what's ever present. Alex, did you want to make any additional comments on that, or anything that Molly shared with us as well?
I think just to highlight what you just shared, which is that we're inviting everything in. So even if your experience was you notice that, you know, that's more unpleasantness, or you're more aware of anxiety that was kind of latent before, you know, can we be okay even if that's our state? I mean, sometimes that's my reality too. In the middle of the day, I take a moment, I do a simple practice, and I notice I feel more anxious. But making contact and being aware of that is so helpful for me, because then I'm not caught in it and I'm not acting out of it. I'm aware of it, and I don't need to fix it or change it or do anything with it, but just holding it with a real kindness, a real patience, and a non-reactivity, I find helps a lot.
Thank you, Alex. That reminds me of a quote that many mindfulness teachers like to use. It's of Viktor Frankl. This is an adaptation, and it's freedom is the ability to pause between stimulus and response, and in that pause to choose. And so sometimes I may have been denying how anxious or tired I was, and just kind of pulling through my day, pushing through my day. And that momentary pause, just a few moments sometimes, can really allow me to see what is present, and then also make some different choices in my life too. So, all right, let's move on. Sorry, I was muted. Sorry about that. You missed my quote then, right? My Viktor Frankl quote. So I'm going to give it to you again.
No, we got that quote.
You got that part. Good.
Yep.
I don't know how that happened. Sorry. Okay, thanks. I love having wing people. So when we talk about mindfulness, it's more than meditation. And many of you probably already know that. But I had a mindfulness teacher once who used to say, many moments, many times throughout the day, of bringing your mindful awareness to whatever you're doing can really enhance those states of mindfulness. And then eventually, over time and with practice, leads to these traits of mindfulness. And when we talk about everyday practices, I've got some of them here on the screen for you now. Pausing is a really powerful one, just to remember to come home periodically throughout our day. Alex talked about Zoom meetings. We're all in it now, and we went from one thing to the next. Is it possible to mindfully transition, to notice our reactivity when it's present, to really give our full sense to listening to someone? So all of these things that you see here, and many other experiences throughout our day, can be used as opportunities for informal mindfulness practices. Sometimes I don't like to call them informal, because it makes it sound less significant than a formal meditation practice. Altogether, they build that muscle of mindfulness. So we're going to transition now and talk a little bit about interest in mindfulness, and dive a little deeper into the research as well. And I'm going to turn this over to Alex now.
Yeah, so I mean, you can see on the slide here, there's a couple of different points. This is really speaking to this accelerating trend of the mainstreaming of mindfulness. And there's a lot of debate around this, right? There's a lot of people that are quite excited about the mainstreaming of mindfulness, and there are others that are really worried and concerned and not excited at all about the mainstreaming of mindfulness. So, but this is what we're in. We're in a moment in time where there really is a lot of mainstreaming. And I think the image is probably captures it the best. When you know that Cookie Monster is now doing meditations, you've really, you've crossed a threshold. Sesame Street is now partnered with one of the largest private companies that offers a meditation app, as well as a few other things that they provide. And they're creating these animated shorts for children. And they did this actually in response to COVID. Well, I think they had it planned before that, but they've accelerated it based on COVID, and really helping children learn the fundamentals of mindfulness, social emotional learning. And, you know, they take these different characters from Sesame Street, and they are trying to teach kids. So again, I think this really just speaks to the kind of time that we're in right now. And on the next slide, this is just a graph as of 2019. You can see it's sort of an exponential curve. It's an exponential growth in the number of publications that are coming out on mindfulness. And so this is data that was obtained from the Web of Science, and it included academic journal articles that had the term mindfulness in their title. And so you can see that as of 2019, we actually crossed another threshold. So there were more than 1,200 articles published that year, and that's continuing to grow and increase. So again, just this is a different lens on that experience, right? This is the sort of research academic lens on that slide we just saw a moment ago, which was sort of the, you know, much more of the mainstream kind of popular press experience.
Alex, I also think that maybe this increase in research is also why so many people are maybe paying more attention to it now as well.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. They work together.
Mhm.
And then Marianne, would you like to share just a little bit about
Sure.
this slide?
This is just a slide that I added to a little bit from the University of California Mindful Health and Safety, and it shows when people kind of stepped in to offering mindfulness in their workplace. And I put the Center for Spirituality and Healing there because about 2015, I think it was, or actually it was before then, 2005, that we started, I believe, teaching mindfulness-based stress reduction courses. And of course, we've taught more and more over the years. General Mills here in our own backyard, I talked about them earlier. That was where the Institute for Mindful Leadership was actually birthed and born. You see Google, you see all these, and these are just a sampling of some of them. But more and more we have seen businesses interested because of the benefits of mindfulness as well, and in an effort to potentially enhance the well-being of their employees.
So in this slide, this is just I try to do a snapshot as brief as I could of where we have evidence. And this is evidence that is not a one-off study. This is coming from systematic reviews, meta-analyses, or evidence maps. And so this is where we have a decent amount of evidence about what are the effects of mindfulness. And this is more on the efficacy side, right? So I'm talking more about efficacy rather than mechanisms of action, because there's tons of interest in the neuroscience around, you know, what are the mechanisms of action? How does this work in the brain? So this is just looking at efficacy. And so this is coming from the existing, you know, randomized control trials in clinical settings that basically show that these are the two that keep consistently coming up. I put a citation down there at the bottom. That's from, this is actually a study that was done by the VA. It's an evidence map. It's just an example. There's a lot more out there that have come to the same conclusion from their systematic reviews. But it's essentially anxiety, stress, and depression. Mindfulness is really effective in these areas. And it's also effective in this kind of category of overall health and well-being. And I know that's a little bit nebulous, and it's partly to do with what are the measures that are being used, right? What's the measure that's being used for well-being? What's the measure that's being used for overall health? And there definitely are measures that are more common, that are valid and reliable, but some of them are still being developed. And even how do we measure the construct of mindfulness itself? This is a really challenging, thorny question, right? How do you say, well, somebody's high in trait mindfulness or somebody's high in state mindfulness? It's not actually an easy question. And so anyways, that was just a brief snapshot of kind of where the evidence is for mindfulness in general. And on the next slide, if we can flip to that one, this is specific. So this is mindfulness in the workplace. And this is coming from a 2020 study. And again, this was a systematic review. And you can see I put the language in quotes there. This is from the authors of that systematic review. And they were doing a pretty sophisticated analysis. So they were looking at both quality, they were looking at design, they were looking at issues of fidelity. They were even doing sensitivity analysis with the existing data. And what they concluded is what you see on the slide here, that there's solid evidence when we're talking about stress, burnout, and well-being, and that this holds across different occupations and also different organizational structures or different organizations. And so this is pretty significant, right? If you have something that seems to cross occupation and organizational structures, that there's something there that's interesting. And they also looked at the existing studies and found that many of them had a follow-up point where they checked in with the participants. And so they found that based on those results, and even when they pool the data and look at it, it seems that these effects persist for at least 3 months. And the reason why it's 3 months is because most studies would do a 3-month follow-up. It's not that there's some magic about 3 months, it's just that the studies use that as the follow-up point. And there were some variations in that. Some studies will do a year follow-up, things like that. But based on the existing evidence, this is what we can say. There's preliminary evidence in the areas of compassion, job satisfaction, work engagement, and resilience. So this is where we can't definitively say, we don't have enough yet to say there's something here that looks promising. So we need additional rigorous studies to be able to say, is this actually an effect here, or is this just something that's showing up in the data from a few studies that are maybe showing this, but it's not actually holding across a large number of studies. The open question area is around performance and productivity. This is really an open question about whether mindfulness has an effect, positive or negative, on performance and productivity. And there's been a lot of debate about this recently. And so just want to, again, so you have a snapshot of where the evidence base is as of today. And you can see down below, this is the sample size that was based on 56 randomized control trials that were looking specifically at mindfulness in a workplace setting, so a mindfulness at work program. And then this is for those of you that are more, perhaps more interested in the mechanisms of action. This is obviously at a high level systems perspective. This is not down at the functional level of, which particular neurons are firing or which networks are activated. But this is the theoretical domains of what's happening. So if you look on this slide, the idea is that mindfulness is primarily training attention. And there's 3 things that it's doing. It's helping us stabilize our attention. It's helping us get better at controlling our attention. And we're also more efficient with our attention. And so when we do those things, we see that that then has impacts on our cognition. So, things like cognitive flexibility, our capacity to hold opposites, right? To hold things that may seem as conflicting, or if it's more nuanced, or even functioning. This gets into some questions around functioning, right? Cognitive capacity. There's some studies that look at like executive functioning. Anyways, that's one area. Then there's a behavior area. So this is, again, looking at our ability to regulate, right? Can we regulate ourselves? And looking at automaticity. So how many times are we just kind of reflexively doing something without any awareness of what we're doing? And so the idea being here is that as we get better with our attention, that automaticity goes down. And then we see other areas like physiology, right? So a lot of people are interested in stress response. Marianne alluded to this with the fight or flight or freeze. I mean, there's other aspects we can add in. Neuroplasticity, so seeing how the brain is actually changing. When you practice meditation, we're seeing different parts of the brain actually change. And even looking at things like aging, so looking at telomeres and, to what effect does mindfulness have on the aging process. And then within the area of emotions, this is looking at, the potency, we can say, like the valence or the potency, how strong do we experience that emotion? Do we react to that emotion? And also this idea of, are we caught in, an experience of an emotion in kind of a large time horizon? Is it a shorter time horizon? This is getting to things like life cycle of an emotion itself. And so once these changes happen, right, so these are all kind of areas that are changing as a result of our attention, we start to see downstream effects, which is the final area. So this is where we'll see performance, which I said before, that's an open question, but many people are interested in this open question. So they're saying, well, based on all this, do we see a change in performance? Looking at things like relationships, are you showing up more compassionately? Is there more empathy? And well-being. So are you showing up and reporting that you just feel like you have more purpose, you're more engaged, you feel a sense of connectedness or belonging, different areas. So again, just wanted to share that for those of you that might be interested. These are some of the functional domains.
And
Marianne, anything you want to add on any of that I
no,
just
I
shared?
think you did a terrific job. That's great. I just want to talk a little bit. Some of you are probably familiar with Daniel Goleman and his work in emotional intelligence, and Richie Davidson, who is at the University of Wisconsin in Madison and has done a great deal of research on mindfulness. And in their book, Altered Traits, they talk about how mindfulness may help us to move through unpredictable environments or also through uncertainty. And we all have heard that term being thrown around a lot. These are unprecedented times. They're difficult times on so many different fronts, all joining together right now. And what they say in their book is that there are three particular aspects of the practice of mindfulness, again, practicing on a regular basis, that can help us handle change and uncertainty and unpredictability. One is and Alex has spoken to this very thoroughly, this ability for stress reduction, to enhance our ability to stabilize, remain calm, and enhance our ability to be more open-minded and curious. Cognitive ability also being enhanced, our ability to make decisions, short-term memory, our ability maybe to stop and reframe something from a different perspective, focus and clarity of thinking, our ability to concentrate. I think there of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I've been reading a lot about her, like many of you probably have this past week too. And many people who have worked with her talked about her ability to really focus and to be very, very present to what was here and now. Ruth Bader Ginsburg perhaps was a very mindful person as well. Another adjective we could give here. So 3 qualities. And then there was a report that recently came out from the Business Group on Health, which is a very large international organization of employers and companies that range from primarily Fortune 100 to 500 companies. And although most of the results came in from this study right before the pandemic hit, when they were publishing the report, the president said what you see on the screen now, which is probably very obvious to all of us now more than ever. Employers are highly focused on employee mental health and well-being, stress, anxiety levels. Many of you are probably hearing that reported or experiencing yourselves right now as they adjust to the pandemic, economic disruption, heightened focus on issue of racial and social issues. So Alex, I'll let you kind of talk a little bit more about the mental health issues too.
Yeah, so on this slide, this is coming from a study. Again, this is a larger systematic review, highlighting that we've kind of crossed an inflection point. And the inflection point, and also notice the date at the bottom of the slide, this is pre-COVID. So we crossed this inflection point before the pandemic. And the inflection point was that mental health issues are now the leading cause of sickness, absence, and long-term work incapacity. It used to be physical issues, but that actually has shifted. And this is looking at studies that was not just in the US, this was actually looking across the globe. And when we drill down one level, we see that workplace mental health issues are primarily being driven by depression, anxiety, and stress. And if we look at the risk factors associated with experiencing some of these workplace mental health issues, you'll see them on the slide there. And Marianne, if you can just hit the advanced key, I can boil all of that down to basically imbalanced job, lack of value and respect, and uncertainty. And remember that this is pre-COVID. So if we add in now the pandemic, it's exacerbating all of these issues. So just as the last slide that Marianne showed, right, if I add in racial disparities, if I add in economic disparities, if I add in health disparities, right, and it's not that these are individual, these are overlapping, right? So economic, health, and racial disparities, they're not each their own thing, they're all intersecting and overlapping. This becomes even worse. And we also know, there was a columnist, I was just reading this the other day. We may all be in the same storm. We're all going through the pandemic, but we're not all in the same boat. So the weight of this is not distributed equally, and we're not experiencing this all in the same way. So this is just, again, a snapshot I wanted to share of what we know based on the research that's been done in this area.
Thanks, Alex. So I mentioned this business group on health earlier, and their recent study that was released this spring, actually in June. And one of the things that they pointed on there was there's really been a movement, as Alex just said, from physical to emotional well-being and mental health. And you'll see there the figures that are considering in the future, which would mean now, and where they've moved from. And then as part of emotional and mental health, by the way, they included mindfulness and training and programs. Now, the training and programs and the formats that they used were very, very different. Some of them were one-time events. Some of them were very comprehensive 3-month programs, others 6 weeks, really varied, but they did offer some. And you'll see increased interest in that. Again, this was all pre-COVID numbers as well. But again, we're seeing an increase, a trend in more and more people being interested in introducing mindfulness as a one resource to enhance well-being.
Yeah, so on this slide, I'm going to spend probably the bulk of my time talking about the top bullet point. You can see some of the bottom bullet points. There's a lot of information there about, there's more programming that's available. There's more apps. There's just been a can't say that, proliferation, there we go, of apps. In fact, the mindfulness industry, and it actually, there is a tracking now of what is known as the mindfulness industry, is more than $1 billion industry at this point. And so that's because of this proliferation of apps and all these other things that are happening. And then same thing with mindfulness programming. There's so much variety. And one of the challenges now is, it's sort of, I'll use this is an imperfect metaphor, but it's like if you put the word graduation in front of the word photo, the price goes up. What's happening now is if you put the word mindful in front of anything, you can charge a premium. So there's just know that that's also part of the scene that's out there right now. And so a big issue is around quality and fidelity, like what are the competencies of the teacher? What's the underlying intention of the organization? So really we have to be kind of critical consumers when we're looking at what's out there. But that was my little riff. I said I wasn't going to talk about the bottom two, but I just did. So the top bullet point, this is what I want to spend my most time on, is really a shift in looking at mindfulness not as an employee skill. So it's sort of like the organization is pushing the responsibility to the employee, but actually now the shift is to say, no, we need to reflect back. It's like we take that reflection of mindfulness, that awareness of mindfulness, and direct it at the organization itself. So we're looking at structures, we're looking at culture, we're looking at leadership, we're looking at whether or not the workplace itself is equitable. And so we're actually taking a hard, critical look at the organization. And so this is a counter to a thesis or an idea that was, I think, pretty common within the mindfulness and workplace space for a long time, which is this idea of a happy worker is a productive worker. And so this is now actually saying, no, we need to take a hard look at the organization itself. And there's more interest in the research side to do this, because we see that actually, an organization that has no interest in its employee, that has just, we're going to try to apply a Band-Aid to kind of a gaping wound of structural issues within the organization, that's going to have a way different outcome than an organization that is saying, no, we are committed organizationally within our structures, within our behaviors, within our language, within how we interact as employees. We're committed to doing this in a fashion that is both aware and that is also holding in these practices of compassion. And I would also add in this dimension of equity, which you're hearing throughout all of the slides. So this is one of the shifts, one of the big trends that I'm seeing right now within the space. And I think it's an important trend because it's not the sort of like organization just kind of putting it upon the employees and saying, yeah, I know the work environment's really tough. I know I'm asking you to work 90 hours a week, but here's some tools. You figure out how to do it. You manage your own stress. I'll give you the tools. It's actually saying, no, you're a partner with me in this, that the employee and the employer together form the overall organization and structure, and that matters, and that is important. So yeah, I think I'll
Alex,
stop there.
yeah, I didn't have time to share this with you, but yesterday I was reading some research that was just recently released by Deloitte Consulting's research arm. And very similar to this, they talked about it was really the role now of organizations to see themselves as social enterprises, and more organizations are doing that, and really taking a look at, they called it human-centered and more holistic, bringing in well-being, including mindfulness, into organizations, so that the culture itself embodies that, work systems as well. So I'm just validating, again, what you just said there from a different source too.
Yeah, and interestingly, I'll just share another little anecdote. My students are now asking me, what organizations do you recommend? So we're seeing it all the way down. So the future workers that are going to be out in the workplace are asking, please tell me the organizations that embody these values. And I know I've seen some other research that's showing this, right? That those that are just now entering the workforce for the first time are actually asking their employers, and they're part of the interview process, right? Do you have any questions? Well, can you tell me about what you're doing with X, Y, and Z? What about employee well-being? What about being able to offer opportunities for, doing something out in the community or doing social justice work, right? So all of this is now coming into the workplace. So I just wanted to share that because my students are asking me, they're saying, well, tell me which organizations you know of that are doing this.
Yeah. Alex, I also think Gallup just came out with a study, and there are others as well, on millennials and Generation Z and what they're looking for, and really supporting the anecdotal comments you're just making there as well.
So note of caution. This is really important, and particularly as I alluded to before with the industry of mindfulness. So mindful awareness, it's not a panacea. It's not a cure-all. And we know that when you are increasingly mindful, you're going to be aware of all emotions. So this is not just pleasant emotions. This is all emotions, and that you are going to feel those more strongly because you're holding them in your awareness, and we're actually directing attention to them. And so this means that there are conditions where we need to be more cautious. We need to approach this with some care and with some real intentionality. And so I've listed some of them. This is not exhaustive, but again, this is coming from the evidence that we have, and you'll see some of them, right? So major depression, a serious mental illness, we could say, psychosis, dementia, suicidal ideation, active trauma, active addiction, substance abuse, or even just recent bereavement. And there are others, but this is kind of a nice sampling. And it's not to say that you can't learn mindfulness if you experience these conditions. I mean, I know my own personal journey, I could check off a few of these in terms of like, oh yes, I've had active trauma, I've had, I've had periods of depression. So it's not as though if you experience those, you can't practice mindfulness, you can't learn. It just means that you need additional support, and you need to have a little bit additional caution and care that's needed. And in fact, there are specific condition-specific mindfulness programs that can be extremely supportive if you yourself or your employees are in one of these categories. And so this is really the last point that's on the slide, which is that participants should really be encouraged to speak with, and I can't emphasize this enough, it's sort of the qualified or certified instructor, because there's so much variation out there right now. So you need to know somebody that's actually been trained, that has some kind of formal training experience in this. Before they begin the program, you really want to have the participants talk to, that competent instructor.
Thanks, Alex. So we wanted to go over with some trends in the workplace now, and much of this is from, you can see the source there, Stanford Business Graduate School report. And this voluntary participation, mindfulness isn't for everyone. And we all know it's really important that people have a sense of psychological safety in the workplace. And there's differing power dynamics. So this is something that across many different sources kind of rises to the surface. Make sure if you're going to offer it that it's voluntary. Top up or top down, that gets debated either way. I will tell you from my personal experience, and also I think this was supported by Stanford's study, that when you have leadership that actually steps in and sponsors or supports this, it has a little bit more sustainability to it, a little bit more emphasis, and can take root a little easier. That's not to critique some of the bottom-up efforts that have taken, and to sustain a program, having people on all levels of the organization interested and involved are critically important. But that initial getting it going, it can help to have leadership endorsing or involved. Tie the program into organizational values and priorities. I think that kind of goes without saying, but it should be woven in, that sustainability, that comprehensiveness that Alex and I were just speaking to, and the Deloitte survey for that matter as well. Tie it into leadership competencies. It's living out loud many organizational values, the principles of Be Here Now, for example, or compassionate living. And then highlight research versus personal passion. We've all probably known those people who have been through a training and come back as really passionate endorsers. And in the workplace in particular, highlight the research and let that drive this, what we know and what we don't know for that matter. Incorporating mindfulness, number 5, mindfulness and well-being practices into everyday workplace settings. Maybe before you start a meeting, you give people 30 seconds or a minute to take a breath, make a transition. Those are simple kinds of things you can do, just everyday things. And then establishing, the research tells us, these workplace mindfulness champions or ambassadors to help inform, evaluate, and promote ongoing programs and efforts. I know at United Health Group, we had a very active champions group who really helped to keep the program alive and well, and make sure, by the way, that there were regular opportunities for them to meditate, and including practice places that were quiet within the workplace to meditate, do yoga, or for some people, do some more contemplative practices as well. So those are just some highlights. We'd really like to move in now, at least for a few more minutes before we close, to look at some questions that may have been asked or to get your comments. So Molly?
Thanks, Marianne. One of the questions we received, sorry, I'm just scanning the chat because it was inputted there. People were really interested in the kind of workplace trend of the organization, really taking on that role of supporting well-being. And they were wondering if you could comment on how this might be impacting the university community, especially at top leadership levels, and if there's any evidence of this being supported at the U.
That's a great question. I off the top of my head, I don't know. I mean, there are people that would be, let me caveat this. There are people that would be much more in the know than I am. I'm peripherally aware of initiatives, but I'm not the best person to be able to answer that. I don't know, Marianne, if you have any visibility into that.
I'll just take on a few things. I think that our President Gable has done some outstanding work in terms of promoting well-being across the university, making students' mental health #1 issue, or at least a real important focal point right out of the gate. I think that says that that's really important. Also, I will say from the center's perspective, we're very grateful that the university has done a fabulous job, I think, of promoting some of the work that we're doing for students and community members and faculty alike in promoting well-being. So I think the university has taken some strong initiatives now, not just with students, but I think with faculty and staff as well. These are really trying times. And I think from, at least from what I've been able to see from the president and other initiatives that I have a little bit of a view of, that it's quite promising.
Yeah, thank you, Marianne. I think that's an important clarification because it's, I was thinking of like specific initiatives where there's a task force or something, and I just, off the top of my head, I can't think of anything. So thank you for adding that.
Molly may know more as well, but yeah.
Yeah, Molly, please feel free to chime in as well.
Yeah, no, I think that was a good summary, Marianne. And so we're running out of time here. We are at the top of the hour. So maybe just one final question. Could you maybe just briefly list a concern or two about maybe some of the reasons why people are not happy about mindfulness or meditation becoming kind of more mainstream or popular?
Yeah, sure. And then Marianne, I'd be curious, jumping in because I'm actively reading in this area and been having discussions with a number of different communities. So the arguments they're varied, but some of the key ones are if you take mindfulness outside of its origins, which are coming from Buddhism, and there's even other contemplative traditions, but if you take them outside of that, there's a concern that you're kind of watering them down. The term that's often used is denaturing. So you're taking them out of their context and somehow losing something when you do that. And one particular critique is around the ethics. So the idea that ethics is a core component within how these are taught within Buddhism, for sure, but also in other traditions as well. And so there's been programs that don't emphasize ethics at all. And so the concern is that then you've lost a core component of what it means to be mindful. So there is some work right now that's going into having mindfulness with the ethical sensitivity. It's sort of an ethically sensitive awareness. I like that. I really like that. But you'll notice that that's not part of the explicit definitions even that we presented today, which are the most popular ones, John Kabat-Zinn's or Diana Winston. Now, I would bet that if they were, either of them were here, and I've had the delight to talk to both of them, they would argue, well, it's there. It's just, you may not recognize it. It's implicit. And so there's a debate about it being implicit versus explicit. So maybe I'll stop there, Marianne, if you have additional.
Yes, I agree with what you're saying. It's really the ethical aspect of it. And I would say that some of the backlash, as well as focusing on enhancing performance and enhancing productivity of employees rather than their overall well-being, and that might be ill-served. And so I think some people take issue with that as well. But the ethical one is the one that I'm most familiar with. And I would say that here at the university, at the center, we have a well-being leadership program that we've introduced to physicians and healthcare professionals this year. And we introduced mindfulness as a very important tool for resiliency and enhancing their emotional intelligence and other aspects. And a really important cornerstone that we start with day one is values and principles and rooting everything that we do in that. And I think many leadership programs do that. And more, Alex, I'm hoping that we see mindfulness programs as a whole, not just making it implicit, but explicit too. Some of these more traditional do no harm kind of ethical stances. Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marianne and Alex. A lot of rich information shared here. And again, we'll be sharing a recording of the webinar in the post-webinar email, so watch for that and you can reference that. And we hope you enjoyed our time here with us and have a great rest of your afternoon. And we hope to see you again on a webinar soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.